Hi, everybody. Welcome to our college admissions breakdown event. This is going to be our first event in our upcoming college admission series. So as some of you know, last year we began our very first college admissions series for the fall semester, for the previous application cycle. So I'm super excited to be starting that up again for this session, for this upcoming application cycle. So first, I'm just going to start off by going over our agenda. So we're going to start off with an introduction, which I'm in right now. Then we're going to be going over an overview of college admissions. We'll be going over key factors as well as a timeline of college admissions. Then I'll quickly answer some registration questions, and then we'll have an audience Q&A. So I just wanted to share a couple of Zoom reminders just to help make sure that this experience is smooth for everybody. So please keep your mic muted until the Q&A portion. If you have any questions, you can send them throughout the chat while I'm speaking, and then we will have that Q&A portion in the end for you to ask questions either out loud or for me to answer the questions you send in the chat. And then finally, just maintain a professional conduct and be respectful to everybody in the Zoom room. So let's get started. So first, we're going to go over an overview of what the college admissions process is like. So in the college admissions process, students will begin applying to undergraduate institutions in the fall of your senior year, which is going to be the year before you begin applying to college. So for example, if you are applying to college to start college in fall of 2023, you would be applying this fall 2022. And I just wanted to clarify something. I did notice this in the questions, so I just wanted to clarify that undergraduate institutions can include both colleges and universities. So colleges typically tend to be focused on just undergraduate students, while universities tend to include programs for both undergrads and graduate students. So I know this was something I was confused about when I was applying, so I just wanted to clarify that term. Then the goal of your application is to provide a glimpse to the admissions officers on who you are as a person and what you have to offer to the university. So what you want to ensure is that your application is focused on you and provides a cohesive narrative about who you are and what you can offer. So you're going to be submitting a variety of information to showcase the different sides of you. And later on, we'll be going over these particular factors. And I know that this journey may be stressful, but it'll also be exhilarating. You will grow tremendously as a person, and we are here to help support you throughout this journey. So first, I just wanted to go over the different types of application platforms that you can use to submit your applications. So the most common one that you'll see is the Common Application. So over 900 colleges use this Common App, and it's the most popular platform. It allows you to have one particular personal statement that is going to be shared to all the colleges you apply to, along with additional information that is shared to all colleges to help make the process simpler on our end, and to also allow colleges to get a good understanding of who you are through the questions that the Common App asks. The Coalition application is very similar to the Common Application, but it was particularly designed focusing on underrepresented groups. There are some nuanced differences between the Common App and Coalition application, and the Coalition application is a bit less popular. There's about roughly 200 colleges that use the Coalition application, but it is still a pretty prominent application platform. Then there's obviously the school-specific applications. So some schools or university networks may require you to submit your application through a portal that they design themselves. So some pretty big examples of these are the UC applications or CUNYs and SUNYs. All of these actually, I should say, have their own particular applications that they prefer for you to apply through. For UCs, it's required. For CUNY, they're also required for SUNYs. There are a few SUNYs you can apply through the Common App, but they also have a SUNY-specific application portal. Then finally, there's a QuestBridge application, which is a particular matching program for first-generation low-income students and 45 partner schools. Now, the QuestBridge application has a completely different nuanced process, and so we are hoping to have an event specifically on QuestBridge to go over the nuanced process on how matching works, the college prep scholars program, and things along those lines. So the application platforms aren't limited to this, but this is to give you a sense and to become familiar with some of the applications you may be seeing as you move forward with the application journey. So now I want to go over the application methods, and this is particularly the timelines of when you would be submitting your applications. So there are four common application methods. The most early and the most strict is early decision. So the thing that differentiates early decision from all the other four is that it is binding. So first, you would be submitting your application to early decision in November, and you would be hearing back by mid-December. Since it is binding, you would be required to attend if you're accepted through early decision. Now, there are some exceptions. For example, there are some universities that will allow you to not attend if the financial aid offer you receive isn't enough for you to attend. But that does not apply for all schools. So you want to make sure that before you commit to applying early decision to a school, that your heart is truly in it and that you know what the policies are like if there are any exceptions to that binding policy. So if you do get accepted to early decision to a school, you would be required to withdraw all of your applications and all of your acceptances if you get accepted to another institution. This is an awesome way to demonstrate interest in a college since you are committing yourself to attend if you get accepted. And for many schools, as I'll touch on briefly later, some schools don't actually track demonstrated interest, especially for the top competitive schools. So this may be your only way to demonstrate interest to those schools. And then obviously, since it's binding, you can only apply to one school through ED. That does differ for Questbridge, but again, Questbridge is a much more nuanced process. Then there's early action, which similar to early decision allows you to apply by November and to hear back by mid-December, but early action is non-binding. So you would not be required to attend if accepted. And therefore you're allowed to apply early action to as many schools as you wish. And I would personally encourage you all to apply early action whenever possible. Then there's regular decision, very similar to early action. It's non-binding. The only difference is that the deadline for your application is a bit later, which means that you would hear back on your decisions a bit later as well. So for regular decision, you are applying and submitting your deadline by either the very end of December, early January, and in some cases, mid-February, and you would hear back by March or April. Regular decision is also non-binding, so you are not required to attend if accepted, and you can apply through regular decision to as many schools as you wish. Now, for all of these programs, you do want to consider application fees and also look into fee waivers if they are applicable to you. And just a note, since regular decision and early action don't have a cap on how many schools you would apply to, I would personally encourage you all to please look out for your own mental health. And I'll also touch on this later, but you want to make sure that you focus on the quality of your applications over the quantity. So please don't apply to more than 15 schools. And then finally, there's rolling admissions. This is the least common, but it is still an option. In rolling admissions, applications are reviewed on a first come, first served basis. So there is a strict deadline, but it's usually much later. However, you're encouraged to submit your applications as soon as is possible to ensure that you can have a higher chance of getting accepted to the institution. So now that we've gone through a brief glimpse on the various factors of college admissions, now I want to go into the key factors that weigh into your admissions journey. So what are the most important factors in admissions? Now, the top most important factor is going to be your GPA, your academic performance, as well as your standardized test scores. After this, your extracurricular activities are also significant. Your essays, which include your personal statement and your supplemental essays, are going to be important. You will have to submit letter of recommendations from your teachers and your counselor. And then there are some other factors such as demonstrated interest, interviews, and portfolios that will also be important. So now that we've gone over these very quickly, let's break each of these down. So first there's GPA and standardized testing. So this is the most important factor because this is going to be what gives college admissions officers a glimpse about your academic performance and your capability to perform well in an academic setting. So this is going to be evaluated by your high school transcript over the 4 years, as well as your school profile. The school profile is something that is submitted by your counselors, and this is designed to give an overview about what your school structure is like, what courses are available to your school, and things along those lines. So the school profile is important because obviously all of us are coming from all across the world. Different types of schools have the capability to offer different things. And so the school profile is a way for colleges to be able to understand you in the context of the school you attend. So some schools may be able to offer all 38 APs, other schools may not be able to offer any. And so colleges will be able to take that into consideration through your school profile. So also there are test scores, and some key standardized tests do include the SAT, the ACT, TOEFL if you're an international student. Now it is obviously important to note that as time goes on, many more schools are becoming test optional or test blind even. So I do encourage you all to look into the schools you're applying to in your college list to see which schools require which tests, which schools are optional. There are some schools that did go optional in 2020 and 2021, but are starting to make testing required again. So you do want to make sure you do your research for all the schools you're applying to see what the requirements are for testing. Now, in terms of coursework, I do want to mention that colleges want to see an upwards trend in rigorous coursework. What this means is that obviously things happen. We have grown a lot over the 4 years of high school, and so your performance in 9th and 10th grade may not be as strong as 11th and 12th grade, and that's okay. Colleges want to see an improvement. What is more alarming is if you have strong grades in your 9th and 10th grade, but then it starts to slip down later on. So if you didn't perform as well as you wish earlier on in high school, it's not the end of the world, but you do want to show that growth, your improvement, your perseverance. And then in terms of rigorous coursework, some common examples of ways to engage in more difficult classes is to enroll in APs, IBs, dual enrollment classes. Now, not all schools offer APs, as I said, and so I would encourage you all to consider self-teaching for APs if that's an option and if you have the room in your schedule. It's because that's a way for you to participate in more rigorous coursework and to also demonstrate your self-drive to go above and beyond and to engage in APs. However, you do obviously want to make sure that you're not overloading yourself or burdening yourself. So obviously, while you do want to engage in coursework, you don't want to engage in such rigorous coursework that you simply can't keep up. So you want to maintain that balance. Now, a common question that came up quite a bit in the registration questions is, what's my ideal test score? What test score should I be striving to achieve? And I hate to be the person that says it depends, but it is dependent on the colleges you're applying to. And so what you want to do is search up the common data set for each college, and you want to be in the 75th percentile of enrolled freshmen. So I included steps on how you can go about this. So first, you can just Google the common data set for each school on your list. You would look for the most recent PDF file. So for most cases, that's going to be the 2021 to 2022 school year. There are a few colleges that don't have that. So that would be 2020 to 2021. And then under the freshman profile, you'll be able to view the 25th and 75th percentile scores for the SAT and ACT, as well as for the GPA. And then you'll be able to find lots of other valuable information in the common data set. So this is going to be your best resource for getting a gauge of what standardized test scores and GPA students admitted to the college received, so that you can ideally be in the 75th percentile to be in the top 25% of students admitted. So here I just included some screenshots of the Googling process. It's very simple. You can just include common data set 2021 to 2022 and the name of the university. So when I did it for Texas A&M, sorry about that. When I did it for Texas A&M, they didn't have the 2021 to 2022. So 2020 to 2021 was the earliest available, but it's a very straightforward process and all colleges are required to have this available on their website. Here I included a few screenshots from last year to help you gauge how different the requirements may be. So for UW, their 25th percentile score for the SAT was a 1220 and their 75th percentile was a 1430. Meanwhile, for Harvard, their overall composite wasn't included, probably because they superscore, but you can see that their SAT 25th percentile was a 720 and their 75th percentile was a 780. So what score in the evidence-based reading section would put you in the top 25% for UW would put you in the bottom 25% for Harvard. So this is just to bring home the point that you need to do the research and you need to look into the stats for all the schools you're applying to so that you can get a better gauge of what's a realistic ballpark score for you to strive for so that you are in a competitive spot. Now, if you are just looking to apply to UW, you don't need to hold yourself to the standard of a 1600 because you would be more than competitive with a 1430. So this is to help you get a more realistic gauge of what scores you should be striving for. Next is your extracurricular activities. So this is another huge factor in your admissions process because colleges want to see that you're engaging in activities outside of the classroom and to see who you are as a person beyond simply your academics. So this is going to be evaluated through your activities description in the Common App. So I included this picture of a screenshot of what that looks like. You'll notice that this is very brief and you'll only have room for, I believe it's 8 or 10. You'll only have room for a limited number of extracurricular activities. And you also shouldn't feel obligated to fill every single one of them. Obviously, you want to be focusing on the quality of your extracurriculars rather than your quantity. You want to be demonstrating commitment and leadership. Ideally, you want to be engaging in activities throughout many years and not simply just one semester, and for many hours a week as well. So this is just an example of what this would look like. It's very brief, which means that you want to be including action words in your responses, such as including verbs such as coordinated or organized or supervised, things along those lines to help make your very brief descriptions of your activities come home to the admissions officers. Now, I included this point because I did notice some questions in registration about what activities are the most impressive to colleges. And so while I will answer that question, I do want you all to be aware that you want to engage in the activities that you personally are the most passionate about, not the ones that are simply impressive to colleges. Because college admissions officers, they've been doing these for decades. They can see right through you engaging in activity just to impress the colleges. That's not fulfilling. And worst comes first, if you get rejected, you're going to feel worthless in the end because you engage in activities solely for the purpose of impressing colleges. Instead, you want to focus on what you're passionate about. What are you interested in? What are you going to be excited to delve hours upon hours per week engaging in to just spend time beyond the classroom? When you engage in activity that you're passionate about, you'll be able to much more strongly convey these activities in your extracurricular activities and in your supplemental essays and possibly even your personal statement. And that will come through and make your application much stronger than if you simply engage in activities just for the sake of making the admissions officers happy. And then finally, I know that there is quite a bit of a debate between having a spike in your application through your extracurriculars or being a well-rounded person. These are very highly debated. And the truth is that we are high school students and not all of us may be capable of having spikes that are expected out of college graduates at the age of high school. Now, it is very important that you engage in activities and you're able to be committed to them to the point where you're able to demonstrate high results out of your extracurriculars, but you don't have to limit yourself to simply activities that go along with the major that you're applying to. You want to have a theme and a story about who you are as a person, and that should come through your extracurriculars. If you have hobbies, passions, talents aside from the major you're applying to, that's completely okay. And it shows that you're a human being. So you want to have that theme and story conveyed through your extracurricular activities that you participate in. So next up, we have the essays. Also, I did notice that there is some activity in the chat. So I just want to let you all know that like I am seeing the points that you are making. And if you have any questions, feel free to send them. I'll just be going to that in the very end. So the next important segment of your application process is the essays. And this is probably the most exciting portion because this is the one that you have the most control over. After a certain point, you can't really control or move back with your GPA or your standardized test scores. At some point, you simply have to move on from retaking the SAT over and over again. You can't really control your recommendation letters after a certain point because that's up to your teachers. However, your essays is something that you can spend the time on to create in a strong quality so that it can demonstrate who you are. So essays can include the personal statement, supplementary essays, the additional information section. I will talk about the additional information section at the end of this, but the common application requires one main personal statement of 650 words. That's a hard cutoff. So if you write above 650, it will cut off your sentence in a very weird form. So please ensure that your essay is actually at 650 words or under. Many colleges will also require you to complete additional supplementary essays. So some colleges may include optional supplementary essays, but optional means required. So if you see an additional supplementary essays, please fill it out. Don't think that optional means actually optional. And one common question is the why us essay. So earlier on, I had mentioned that I encourage you all to focus on fewer schools and applying to fewer schools and having a higher quality of applications. And this is where things become important. As you start applying to more and more schools, the number of supplementary essays you're going to have to complete will pile up. And that means you're going to be able to spend fewer time doing the research in the schools to produce quality responses to these essays. So you want to make sure that you do your research for all the schools you're applying to better understand the schools, to understand what you enjoy about the school, why you can see yourself in that school, and so that you would be able to craft a strong response to this question. At the same time, when building your colleges, you also want to make sure that the colleges you're applying to are colleges that you're actually invested in and can see yourself in, because there's no point in wasting your time and money applying to a school and wasting time that you could be spending on other applications to other schools if you're not even going to see yourself enjoying being in that school. So you want to make sure you're focusing on yourself in these essays and again, conveying a story and a narrative about how you've grown over the years, what is most important to you, what you value. So I encourage you all to pick 1 to 3 values about yourself that you want to bring home through your essays. And then as you're going through your essay drafts, rereading them and maybe even having a friend read it and asking them, what sense do you gain of me after you've read this essay? And you want to make sure that these values are very clear to the admissions officers by the time they're done reading your essay. And then for the additional information section, please do not write an essay in that section or use it as an opportunity to list more extracurriculars that you weren't able to fit in the activity section. That's not what this is for. This is for you to briefly include any other crucial information that you didn't have an opportunity to include otherwise. For example, for me, I did have a dip in my grades. So I used the additional information section to give an explanation for that dip so they can understand the context behind it. I know that in previous years, I'm not sure whether the Common App is going to include it this year, but I do know that last year and the year before, they had a question particular to COVID to describe if you were affected by COVID. So that is something to look out for as well. Okay, the next key factor of college admissions are your letter of recommendations. So this will include your teacher recommendation letters as well as your secondary school report. So that's the one that is submitted by your counselor. The number of required recommendations will differ by school. So most schools will require 1 to 2, occasionally 3 from teachers and 1 from your counselor, which is that secondary school report. I had one school, the Sophie Davis School of Medicine, which required 5. So make sure you do your research to see the number of required recommendations. In addition, some schools may accept additional recommendations beyond that required point, but you want to make sure that if you do submit additional recommendations, that they're actually quality recommendations that bring in a new perspective that isn't already shown in your application. For example, for me, I included a recommendation from my research professor because research is a side that you couldn't see anywhere else in my application besides the activities portion, and now through a recommendation letter from my professor. So I would encourage you all to identify 2 teachers who would be able to speak strongly about your qualities. This will typically be 1 humanities teacher and 1 STEM teacher. Humanities meaning literature, social studies, history, anything along those lines, and STEM being the hardcore STEM classes. But this doesn't have to be necessarily the way you go about it. If you are a very strong STEM student, then you could very well have 2 STEM teachers do your recommendation letters. Alternatively, if you're a very strong humanities student, you could have your rec letters from 2 humanities teachers, and that would be okay. But ideally, you would want to have 1 humanities and 1 STEM. So a tip from me is that I would encourage you all to actually mention the qualities you want your rec letter writer to write about whenever you're requesting it. So for example, for me, I included in my email to my professor that I believe you would be able to speak strongly on my leadership abilities, my organization, my team work abilities, my collaboration activities is what I meant. So things like that. So instead of simply just asking, would you be willing to write a recommendation letter for me? I would encourage you to actually mention which qualities you want your rec letter writer to write about so that they can create a better recommendation letter. Sometimes you'll also want to include a brag sheet or a resume or not cover letter, a CV. These are not always necessary. A brag sheet should be more than enough. Brag sheets typically are going to include just descriptions about some activities you participate in, a meaningful time in a class with that teacher, things along those lines. When I asked my research professor for a rec letter, he asked me for a CV, but most of the times you won't need that. And so obviously, because you are going to be needing these rec letters, if you are not applying this cycle, but are just here earlier on, make sure that you're building relationships with your teachers as early as possible through attending office hours or just talking with your teacher briefly outside of class, having individual meetings, sending emails about things you find interesting, participating in class, things along of that nature. And then in terms of when to ask for your recommendation letters, I would encourage you all to ask your professors at least 2 to 3 months in advance, ideally the spring of your junior year or the summer of your senior year. Now, at the very last moment, you want at least 1 month in advance. So if you have less than a month, then you're in a very big time crunch because these teachers have so many students that are going to be requesting them for rec letters. So you want to give them ample notice so that they're able to create a quality rec letter. So some other important factors that will be important, but not as significant as the ones I've mentioned. So first, there's the demonstrated interest. So colleges want to accept students who they know will actually attend their school. Obviously, colleges are very aware that we are all applying to many schools because we want to make sure that we have options so that we have a place to go after the admission cycle is over. However, you want to demonstrate that you're actually invested in the school and not simply applying just for the sake of applying. So you can do this through signing up for email newsletters, engaging with the website. Actually, I remember attending an information session where the admissions officers literally said that they had a way of tracking who engaged with their website, and they would to have a split screen to see like a demonstrated interest on one side and the application on the other. That's an extreme version, but it is very true that schools are tracking how you demonstrate interest. So engage with the website, attend information sessions, college tours if possible. Obviously, if you live far away or if you are an international student, this is more difficult, but you can still connect with AOs and current students to demonstrate your interest as well. Now, there are going to be some schools that don't track interest. So again, early decision would be the only way for you to indicate interest for those schools. Then we have our interviews. So the interviews aren't as significant, but they are still an opportunity to demonstrate who you are, why you're interested. They're also an opportunity for colleges to verify the information. So sometimes a person may write about an activity in the application and colleges may ask about it just to learn more about it, clarify any confusions, things like that. Then we also have portfolios, research abstracts, and awards. So you aren't required to submit these for most cases unless you're applying to particular programs, but these are opportunities for you to showcase results of the extracurriculars that you've participated in. And then finally, there's financial aid. So it is very true that, especially if you're an international student, many schools are going to be need aware when you're applying. So that is unfortunately a factor that colleges may take into account. Most schools for domestic students are going to be need blind, but if you're an international student, there are still the top schools that do not take into consideration your income, but you want to make sure that you're completing your FAFSA, CSS profile, and other important financial aid forms so that you can maximize the financial aid offers that you would receive. So I'm going to take a quick break for questions actually right now. So I know that I see a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm just going to go through and answer them. So the first question I see is, if you don't get accepted early action, can you still apply regular decision? So yes and no. This is going to be specific to the school. There is an option. So first of all, some schools have policies where if you get rejected early decision or early action, that's the end. You can't apply further. That's unfortunately a policy for some schools. Other schools do actually allow you to reapply. Some schools may also defer you or waitlist you in early decision or early action. To be deferred means that they aren't considering you for this application cycle, but they will consider you along with the regular decision students to reevaluate your application with that pool. And then waitlisted means that once regular decision is over, then once they have all of those students, then they would consider you after that if there are any remaining seats. So you want to make sure that you're checking with the policies of your school. It's not for all schools. Some schools just after you're rejected, it's over, and that's actually the case for most schools, unless you get deferred or waitlisted, but there are a few schools that will allow you to reapply. The next question I see is, what's the difference between demonstrated interest and extracurriculars? So demonstrated interest is not for your major, but it's for the school itself. So for example, if I'm applying to, say, Barnard, for example, demonstrated interest would be me engaging with the college to let Barnard know that I am interested in attending Barnard. Extracurriculars are activities that I'm personally interested in. So these are activities such as clubs, sports, debate, leadership, all sorts of extracurriculars that I'm personally interested in. So demonstrated interest is interest in the college. Extracurriculars are you engaging in your own interests and your own passions. Thank you for Chintia for explaining the super scoring. So, wait, let me see. Sorry, one question. Oh, okay. How important is National Merit Scholarship in college admissions? So National Merit is a great scholarship if you can get accepted, but it's not a deal breaker. There are many, many students who don't get in National Merit, but still are able to attend the top universities. If you are a commended scholar, if you do get the National Merit Scholarship, that's a great plus to include in your awards or recognitions portions of your admissions. But if you don't get it, it's not a deal breaker. You still have many other things that can root for you to help you get in. So it is a great plus. If you don't get it, it's not the end of the world. It is extremely competitive. So you will be fine. If anybody is willing to donate hundreds of thousands of dollars, then maybe we could have a scholarship for college tuition. But yeah, if you have 1 year of foreign language, it may not necessarily mean an automatic rejection. I know the UCs and some schools have particular requirements for how long they want you to engage in particular activities. It is strongly recommended that you engage in at least 3 years, ideally 4 years of foreign language, but it may not mean an automatic rejection. It may just be a red flag. This is the last question I'm going to answer, and then we'll move on. So I've always heard about people applying in 11th grade and then apply again in 12th grade to different universities. So that's an interesting thing. 1 second. Sorry, I felt like I had to cough for a moment, but so there are some students who apply early. Maybe you finished your high school requirements early, and so you're able to apply. Sorry, no. So maybe you're able to apply early because you would already be on track to finish high school in 3 years. I actually knew of a student who she had finished all of her high school requirements and was on track to be done with her high school by the end of 11th grade. So she had applied to colleges in 11th grade. That's an extreme exception. The vast majority of students are applying to their college in the fall semester of their senior year in 12th grade. So there are some exceptions, but the vast majority of the time, you're applying in the fall of your senior year. If you aren't able to apply in 11th grade, that is completely normal, not a downfall at all. So I'm going to move on to our application timeline. If you have any other questions, you can feel free to continue sending them in the chat, and I'll answer them at the end. Okay, awesome. So first, August. So it is the end of July, so I'm just going to start off with August. But in August, you want to create a list or a spreadsheet listing all of your application deadlines, requirements for all the schools you're applying to, and any other additional information that you feel will be beneficial for you to be keeping track of. I think it is extremely helpful to be organized with all the schools you're applying to, all the information that you need, what type of schools, whether it's a reach school, a safety, etc. Sorry. So I encourage you all to create that spreadsheet. Next, you want to start brainstorming topics for your personal statement and ideally have a draft completed, preferably much more than one draft of your personal statement by the end of August. This is to help you be on track to then be able to share your draft with other people to revise it. You're going to be going through many, many drafts of your common application statement. I think I went through like about 10. I know some people who went through many more drafts of their personal statement. So you want to start early so that you can get advice on your personal statement and revise it so that the end result is of quality. Next, you want to start creating accounts for the application portals. Common App starts on August 1st, so you want to start signing up and filling out the basic demographic sections. You want to register for final administration of the SAT or ACT if necessary, and then you also want to apply for any college flying programs. So I actually didn't know about flying programs until after I was done with college admissions. Flying programs are a great opportunity for, they typically tend to be very competitive, but if you're accepted, you may either be flown out to that university, or in the age of COVID, it may just happen remotely. But these are opportunities for you to engage with that school, get to know the school better, attend information sessions, etc., to get to know that school better. So they are an amazing way to show demonstrated interest and to increase your chances of getting accepted to that school later on as well. So definitely look out for those. Then in September, by the end of September, you want to be done requesting recommendation letters. I would actually encourage you all to get that done in August if possible, but I know many teachers aren't checking their emails over the summer, so that's why I included this in September. But you want to request recommendation letters well in advance of your deadlines so that your teachers have enough time to produce a quality letter. You want to continue writing draft of your personal statement and share your essay with roughly 2 to 7 people for feedback. Don't overdo it because you want to make sure you're keeping your authentic voice, but you do still want to gain insight from other people. Next, you want to write drafts for supplemental essays for your EA and ED schools and complete a final administration of the SAT or ACT if necessary. In October, you want to follow up with your recommenders for the status of letters, especially if applying ED and EA. You want to make sure that your application is that your rec letter writer is actually able to submit that recommendation so that if there's any last minute emergencies, you have enough time to ask someone else. You want to start filling out the financial aid forms, which start coming out around October, which includes the FAFSA CSS profile, other state-specific or school-specific forms, or other forms for international students. You want to revise and submit your ED and EA applications, since most ED and EA application deadlines are November 1st and November 15th. You want to modify your personal statement and supplemental essays, and you want to begin writing your supplemental essays for your regular decision schools. Next, November. So throughout November, you're going to be focusing on your regular decision schools, writing out all those supplemental essays for your RD schools. You want to attend interviews if invited or if necessary for your ED and EA schools. You want to make revisions to your personal statement if necessary, and you want to look for other financial aid options, such as scholarships and grants to help with tuition. Then in December and January, that's going to be your deadline for most RD schools. So you're going to be finalizing and submitting, finishing up any remaining supplemental essays. You're going to review your acceptance offers and financial aid offers from your EA and ED schools. If you are accepted to ED, then you're done. So you can commit to your ED school and be done with the application journey. If you're waitlisted from any schools, you want to start sending letters of interest to the schools you're waitlisted from. And then again, if you have any interviews or anything along those lines, you want to attend those. And then finally, February to May. So this is going to be your spring semester of your senior year. You want to attend any interviews if invited for your regular decision and rolling admission schools. You want to update your financial aid forms if any updates happen since the time you filled out your financial aid in October. You want to review acceptance offers and financial aid offers, compare them, things like that. You want to send letters of interest if you're waitlisted, and you want to appeal for more financial aid if the financial aid offers you receive through your acceptance letters isn't enough. After doing all of your research about the schools you've been accepted to, you want to commit to a school by enrolling and submitting that deposit, and then you want to start attending orientations in May, enrolling in classes if you're able to, things like that. All right, so that is our application timeline, and that finishes up the workshop presentation portion. So I do want to start going through the registration questions and answering some of the questions in the chat. I'll answer maybe 1 or 2 registration questions before I answer Arfat. I know you raised your hand, so I'll answer that after I touch on a few registration questions. So The first registration question I see is, what are some tips or ways to prepare for a college interview? So that's a great question. For a college interview, you want to make sure you're doing your research about the school. So first, just making sure you remind yourself about what it is about that school that you're interested in, why you like that school, what particular programs fascinate you. You want to maybe search up some common interview questions, for example, to tell me about yourself, tell me about a challenging situation, tell me about why you're interested in the school, common questions like that, and start preparing your responses. You don't have to have the responses memorized to the T, but you do want to have a general sense of some stories you can share. There is that STAR method of responding to interview questions. I forgot what the acronym stands for, but make sure that you start off and are able to end off with going through a narrative about ending with a solution and how you solved an issue for a question asking about a challenge, things like that. So the next question I'll answer is, how much do SAT scores affect my decisions? I heard that there's inflation due to colleges being test optional. I feel like my SAT score is still pretty low. I want to attend as an Asian male 1490. So as I mentioned earlier, SAT scores, the ideal SAT score is going to be dependent for the schools you're applying to. A 1490 is more than enough for most schools. And honestly, after you reach the 1500 point, it's really just up to luck, and colleges are aware of that. A curve in one cycle could mean that missing one math question cuts off 70 points, while in another SAT administration, missing one math question could mean losing no points at all. So colleges are aware of that, and a 1490 is a very competitive score. That being said, for the top schools, it may put you in the lower 25 percentile, and that's just what it is. There are many schools going test optional, as you said. So if you feel that your score isn't up to par with the colleges you're applying for, you do have the option to not share your SAT scores with them. But I personally think that your score is a competitive score. Okay, Arfat, I know you raised your hand. Do you want to ask your question? Okay, I'll guess that it's a mistake, but if you want to, you can send it in the chat. I'll answer a few questions from the chat. So is secondary school report mandatory? Yes, it is. This is not, you're not responsible for the secondary school report. Your counselor or for some international schools, that'll mean your principal or another teacher, they'll be responsible for submitting that secondary school report. But yes, it is mandatory. And yes, it applies to all colleges, at least through the Common App. There are some schools that have other portals, and I'm not sure, that would depend on the specific college if they have a different portal, if they need the secondary school report or not. But for the vast majority of schools, yes, it is mandatory. And then, do all universities require you choose your major later on? For the vast majority of schools, you actually don't need to, you're not required to have a major set in stone before you even get in. For most schools, the hard deadline for declaring a major is your sophomore year in college. So there's that. However, for very specialized programs, for example, the Cooper Union has very particular programs, either engineering, architecture, or arts. So for a school that's very specialized, yeah, you would need to have an idea of a particular major or a particular field you want to go in. So that is the case for a few exceptions, but for the vast majority of schools, you're not actually required to declare a major. So there are a huge number of students who apply as undecided, and that's completely fine. So I'll go through a few more registration questions now. So let's see. I have a small school and I haven't asked for teacher recommendation letters yet. Should I be worried? I would say no. I personally had asked my teachers for recommendation letters at the beginning of the fall semester, and that was more than enough time. But I would encourage you to ask as early as possible, just because when school starts, a lot of students are going to be asking for rec letters, and you want your teachers to have enough time to produce a quality letter. So you don't need to be worried right now if you haven't. There are many students who have earlier, but if you can ask right now, if your teacher is responsive, you can ask them now. Otherwise, ask them as soon as the school year starts. And then how to effectively write extracurriculars. I did touch on that. You want to make sure you're including action words to describe. There's actually a list of action verbs in the Edu Research channels. I'll include that in the announcements, but there are some verbs that you can include to help make your activities stand out? Okay. The next question I see is, can we recycle our personal statement for all scholarships or just STEM? So I think, so first I want to clarify that scholarships, there are various types of scholarships. There are some essay scholarships. There are scholarships that are based off of experiences, applications. There are so many types of scholarships. I think you're talking about college admissions and not scholarships. So yeah, if you're applying through the Common App, you're going to be using your same personal statement for all the schools you're applying through to the Common App. So yeah, you would be recycling your essays there. For supplemental essays, you do want to be careful that so I would encourage you to have essays that are specific to the school, but you will be finding yourself reusing some information. For example, for questions that are more specific to you as an individual, for those types of questions, you will find yourself reusing some information from a supplemental essay to one school to a supplemental essay to another school. And that's completely fine as long as you're making sure that you still do include some information that's specific to that school to make sure your answer isn't generic. This is especially important for the why us essays. For example, if you're applying to a school in New York City, I'm just saying this because I'm from New York, but if you're applying to any college in New York City, you don't want your answer to the why us school to be simply that I enjoy the city and I love the location, because there are so many different schools in that city and that answer isn't specific to the school. So you do want to be strategic about how you go about recycling your essays, but it will save you a lot of time to reuse your information as long as you go about it wisely. So the next question I see is, what's the difference between a school report, school profile, and transcript? So school profile is an overview about the school itself. So just giving insight into what your school is like, how your school works, the courses available, things like that. School report, the secondary school report, that is your counselor recommendation letter. So that is your counselor writing about you, sending a recommendation letter about you, and answering some checkboxes about how you score in particular qualities for some schools. Your transcript is your academic records, so the grades that you've got and your GPA across all 4 years. I hope that clarifies. Okay, I'm going to go back to some registration questions. So let's see. Is it okay if I don't submit an sorry, is it okay if I don't submit an AP score I got 2 for a subject not related to my major? That's completely fine. I would say that if you get less than a 3, I would personally recommend you not report it. You're allowed not to report AP scores on your exams. If you don't think that your score was good enough, that's completely fine. So yeah, you'll be fine. And does doing a wide range of ECs just in 11th and 12th grade affect my chances? So to an extent, obviously colleges want to be seeing you engage in activities throughout your 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade years. So it is sort of a flag that colleges would ideally like to see you doing the activities in 9th and 10th grade. If you haven't been able to for whatever reason, it's not the end of the world. You want to make sure that you're engaging in activities that you're actually invested in. You don't want to seem like you're engaging in activities just because you realize that they're important for college and now you're engaging in them. Again, you want to make sure these are activities you're personally passionate about, but I would encourage you to just let go what happened in the past. You can't control that, and to instead focus on the extracurricular activities you're engaging in now to make sure that they are of quality, that they demonstrate what you're passionate about, things along that nature. Okay, I will go back to the chat. Does school prestige correlate with its quality of education in the US? Yes and no. For the vast majority of schools, regardless of prestige, the education is roughly the same. For example, I'm currently attending a state university, but the education quality in my state university is known by some employers to be much more rigorous than that of other competitive schools in my city. So it's not, you have to look into much more than simply just the rankings and the prestige. The one thing is that prestige is universities do give you access to a larger alumni network and larger opportunities for networking and forming connections. So that's probably the biggest advantage of attending a prestigious school. However, there are many, many students who attend less prestigious schools and enjoy it more, or have higher quality education, things along that nature, in schools that aren't ranked as high. So prestige matters a little bit, and it does have more of an impact on students who are who come from underprivileged backgrounds, there is research that shows that the biggest impact is on students who come from underprivileged backgrounds. However, there are many schools that may not be known as prestigious or may not be as highly ranked, but still have very high quality education in those schools. Would it be wise to use same EC from my essay in the short answer portion if the EC has multiple effects and morals? I think it would depend. Wise, I'm not sure. I mean, I think that there are many ways you can go about answering a question. I would say that you want to make sure that you're demonstrating different sides of you or making sure that you're not repeating yourself. So if you're able to differentiate your responses and make sure that the themes that come across in your responses are different from your essay and your supplemental, your main essay and your supplemental essays, then I think you'll be fine. I would encourage you to think about other ways to go about it. However, I have seen examples of students who have written about CS experiences and multiple responses, but were able to craft them in different ways and show different sides of it, and were able to be successful in their application process. How do you make your SAT score seem less important on paper? Also, my GPA is poor in 9th and 10th grade because I was really struggling to adapt to the pandemic. How do I highlight the better parts of my GPA? Okay, so you've done amazing in your better parts of your GPA, and congratulations for that. So again, as I said, colleges are going to be understanding, and you do have that additional information portion. So I personally was in a similar situation for you after the pandemic. Things did happen, and so I did have a dip. So I used the additional information section to explain that in a professional manner, focusing less so much on making a pity scene, but what I've learned from it, acknowledging the things that brought you down, not shifting the blame and being conscious about where you went wrong, but also focusing on how you've learned and how you've grown. You can maybe talk about a challenge and talk about your perseverance in your personal statement to show that you have learned and have grown. Colleges will be able to see that trend in your transcript, so they will notice it, but you also have that additional information section to explain that dip. I would just encourage you to make sure that in the additional information section, you're focusing more on how you've grown, giving an explanation for the dip, but explaining how you've grown. Okay, let me go back to registration questions. What are some things that impress colleges the most? Yeah, so this was a question about extracurriculars and asking what types of extracurriculars are impressive to colleges. So I did want to answer this. As I said before, you want to engage in activities that you are personally passionate about. Activities that colleges do like to see are engaging in leadership, participating in competitions where possible, prestigious competitions, engaging in research, engaging in activities for a long amount of time. So these are some common things that colleges do like to see. However, please do not engage in these activities solely for the sake of impressing colleges. If business is your passion, for example, then through that business passion, you can engage in activities particular to business that mean a lot to you, such as starting your own company, participating in business internships, participating in competitions for business ideas, things like that. If you are interested in STEM, then you can focus on that STEM passion and engage in activities in STEM, such as participating in research conferences. So you want to think about it through the lens of what you're interested in first, and then go through as rigorous of activities as you can and be committed to the activities you participated in the activities you're personally interested in. Okay, let me see if there's any other registration questions. Okay, the last question on registration is about college essays. So some key components and things to have in your college essay. So I did touch on this a little bit, but you want to make sure that overall you're conveying a narrative and a story that ends off leaving the admissions officers clear about 1 to 3 values that are crucial to you. So something that you could do is ask your friends about maybe 1 to 3 things, 1 to 3 words they would use to describe you, or ask yourself, what are 1 to 3 themes that I want to be very clear from my essay after the admissions officers have read it. Then you want to make sure that through your essay, you're focusing on you yourself. I have seen some essays where students may focus more on someone who inspires them, but write so much about the person who inspires them to the point where college admissions officers want to accept the person they're writing about and not themselves. Ultimately, this is an opportunity for you to share information about yourself. So you want to make sure you are the center of your essay, but you want to make sure that through a cohesive and well-crafted essay, you leave you leave the readers with a clear understanding of who you are and what you value. Okay, back to the chat. So, do colleges care if you have a 65 in gym? So, I would say that, like, ideally, you want to make sure that you are putting in effort in all of the components, all the classes that you take. And yeah, it is kind of a flag to have a 65 in gym. It's not the end of the world. If it is what you got, it's not the end of the world. If you have an explanation for why you got a 65 in gym, then you can include that in your additional information section. If that's just a pass, you can't do anything about it. But ideally, you do want to make sure you're putting in effort and showing effort for all of the components of your application and all the classes that you take. Do I submit my report cards, or does a transcript that have all my grades suffice? You would be just submitting your transcript. You don't need to include your individual report cards. Your transcript is all the colleges are asking for. Do awards matter to colleges? My school doesn't do class ranker awards nor NHS, and it's very hard to get an award outside of school. If I was in the same position as you, my school also did not offer many awards aside from just a few that were only offered to seniors. So it was very difficult to get awards. What you can do is look for competitions in your area or look for research conferences or things like that. But if you still find it difficult to get an award, it's completely okay. You can include in your additional information section that my high school does not offer blank. Don't be too rambly about it. You can just include in one sentence that my school doesn't offer it. It would be ideal if you have any awards or potentially leadership positions or things like that. I would encourage you to look locally for if any are offered, but colleges will be understanding if your school simply doesn't offer it. On the additional information section can include how my school and curriculum did not allow me to take rigorous courses. You can include that, definitely. Again, your college admissions officers will also see your school profile, so they'll get the understanding of the courses that are available and evaluate you in the context. Depending on where you are in your application stage, if you aren't yet a senior, I would encourage you to also potentially start self-studying if you have the time to, so that you can show initiative and also to just focus on your extracurriculars more to compensate. But again, colleges are evaluating you in the context of your high school. So if your high school did not offer APs, then you wouldn't be held to that same standard of someone who did have all 38 APs offered in their school. So yeah. Let's see. I am self-studying for APs for next year. It's offered in school, teachers don't teach, but my exam is next year. Can I explain the situation in the Common App? Yeah, you can. You can include in your Common App that I'm currently self-studying for 4 APs and I'm anticipating to take the exams in my senior year. Obviously, it's not going to have as much of a weight as if you did have your AP exam scores in the end. So, because then if you had your AP scores in the end, it would show the result of your studying. But the fact that you're studying in and of itself is something that I think is worth including in your additional information section and does show that you are still taking the initiative. If I'm an international student, will I be competing against US students, international students, or both? So you would primarily be competing against international students, I believe. That's just how it is. So in the US, you would be competing against students within your own high school compared to the context of what your high school has to offer other students in your high school. So you would be mostly competing against other international students. Do I send the school profile or do they get it themselves? So your school profile and your school report, both of those are submitted by your counselor. So you don't need to worry about that. Your counselor or your principal or whoever's in charge of that, they are the ones responsible for sending it. Okay, I'll do a last call for questions. I'll maybe answer 1 or 2 more questions if you guys send it in the chat. Otherwise, I do want to just thank you all for attending this event. I hope that I was able to provide you all a comprehensive overview of the college admissions, key factors in the admissions, as well as a timeline. Like I said, I will be including the slides in the announcements once we're done with this. And I'm also just very grateful for you all for attending this event. So I don't see any more questions, so I am going to end it for now. But thank you so much, everybody, for attending. I look forward to seeing you all hopefully next week. And if you have other questions that we weren't able to get to, please send them in the Discord channels. We'll be more than happy to answer them on the server at any time that we're able to respond to them. And thank you so much, everybody.